right, guys. Good to see everybody tonight. I finally made it in here, so if I can actually get organized, I know this is fascinating to the people on Facebook, we will get to the text. So turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 6. 2 Corinthians 9. We're in a section in 2 Corinthians. It seems like we've been talking about it for a while, but we've had a lot of things happen and been going back and forth with different things on Wednesday nights. Thank you guys who were here last week for Wednesday night. Appreciate that. But for the Awana Awards. But we're in a section, and this is the last paragraph of it, where Paul is talking about the offering that he's been taking up. And in this last one, he starts to talk in general terms about all that goes into and all that has to do with generosity. And we have the famous verse of the Lord loves a cheerful giver, which is one of there are a lot of verses in 2 Corinthians that we know, but we don't necessarily know them in context. And that's one of them. And so let me read it to you. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 9. I'm going to read verses 6 through 15, so down through the end of the chapter. He says, the point is this. It's always good when a preacher tells you that. The point is this. Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. As it is written, he has distributed freely, he has given to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way, to be generous in every way, which through us will produce thanksgiving to God. For the ministry of this service is not only supplying the needs of the saints, but is also overflowing in many thanksgivings to God. By their approval of this service, they will glorify God because of your submission that comes from your confession of the gospel of Christ and the generosity of your contribution to them and for all others. While they long for you and pray for you because of the surpassing grace of God upon you, thanks be to God for his inexpressible gift. And so Paul is really wrapping up. When we get to chapter 10, he goes in a different direction. He's going to start talking about his apostleship and all of that. So this really wraps up the section where he's talking about this offering. So remember, the offering is being taken up for the church at Jerusalem. The church at Jerusalem was very poor. They didn't have a lot of stuff, which is interesting since that's where everything got started. But that's where we are. They are suffering. When persecution hit the church at Jerusalem early in the book of Acts, everybody fled, and very few were able to stay, and the ones that did really suffered financially. And so they're taking up a love offering, to use our language. They're taking up a love offering for this church. A lot of churches are contributing, so it's very similar to what we do as Southern Baptists with things like Annie Armstrong or Lottie Moon or something like that. And Paul's been talking, he talks about it in several books, actually, and so he's talking to the church at Corinth about it. So he's talked about the specifics. He's talked about how Titus is going to help carry it, how these other guys are going to be with Titus. He doesn't name them, but he says we got more people coming. And so he starts to sum up the principle behind it all. So go back to verse 6. He says, the point is this, because Paul could be kind of wordy, and he wants to make sure they understand. Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. What's he talking about? Well, this is not a name it and claim it sort of theology here. He's not saying like the guys on TBN do, so send in your $100 seed, your $1,000 seed, and God will multiply it this, while they've got their jet out back and all that. That's not what this is. But he is talking about the principle of generosity. He's talking about the principle of sowing and reaping. Here, it's very much a physical thing, a financial thing, but also a spiritual thing, in that you have to put in the work. You have to put in what it takes to see the results, in other words. You're just not going to see things happen. So he tells them, if you sow sparingly, you're going to reap sparingly. So the spiritual benefits, the things that would come from them taking up this offering, if they just sort of kind of did it and didn't really do a good job of it, they're not going to really get a lot out of it themselves. Because you guys know there is joy in being generous. There is joy in helping others. It's a spiritual gift. Some people, God just gifts them that way and uses them to be generous and to give. It's actually listed in the New Testament as a gift, but the principle applies to us all. So he says, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. I don't think there's ever been anybody who's regretted giving too much money in the Lord's service. You never hear that. I've been around a lot of people towards the end of their life. I've never had anybody look at me and say, I just tithed way too much. I've never heard that. It doesn't exist, right? That's not one of the things that people say. And that's what he's trying to get across here. Now, he's talking about this specific offering here. So in verse 7, he gives them some encouragement because everybody's going to be able to give a little bit differently. He says, each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. So he's talking about this special offering. This is beyond, I'm a good Baptist preacher. This is above and beyond their tithes and offerings, right? How many times have you heard that in giving campaigns and that sort of thing? But this is not, they're not supporting their church in this. This isn't how they're providing for, their pastors and that sort of thing. They're helping another church. And so when it comes to things like Annie Armstrong or Lottie Moon or, if we take up, some other offering, you have to pray about that and think about that and say, what is the Lord leading me to give? What should I give? And not worry about what anybody else is giving. But you decide and you give it with cheerfulness, with generosity, and the Lord uses that. And so, in fact, let me go ahead and say, we're going to have an opportunity this summer. I know zero details of when we're going to take up this offering, when we're going to do anything. It just got passed this week at the Mid-South Baptist Association. But our association of our churches here in the Memphis area has set aside $25,000 to match money, up to $25,000, to match money that the local churches give in support of Ukraine, specifically to the North American Mission Board and to Send Relief, the Southern Baptists who are already in Ukraine. So some Sunday this summer, we're going to take up, and we're going to talk about it. Nobody knows this. This is brand new for y'all. One Sunday this summer, we're going to take up a love offering for Ukraine. And if we give $5,000, that 5 is going to become 10. Because up to $25,000, they'll match that. And so that's going to go out to all the churches in the association, and some will be able to participate. Some have already given. But it's going to be an opportunity for us to partner with other churches to do that. And so that's kind of similar to what he's talking about here, that we do that cheerfully. We don't do it under compulsion. You don't have to give. This isn't tithing. This isn't out of, this is the first thing you do as far when you make out your budget and all of that. This is a one-time offering where he's saying you give cheerfully and do it in a way where you are sowing so that you then reap. So verse 8, he says, and God is able to make all grace abound to you. So there's some spiritual results here. So that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, in other words, God provides, you may abound in every good work. So the widow's mite, for instance, she gave all she had. Well, at the end of the day, whatever the budget was for the temple, if they had such things, her little offering that day didn't really add up to much. It was kind of after the decimal, as far as that goes. But it was hugely generous and faithful on her part, and the Lord honored that. So that's what he's talking about here is you and I being generous for others. And he quotes from a psalm. In verse 9, he says, as it is written, and I'm going to read this, and then we're going to go to that psalm because I want you to see the whole thing. He has distributed freely. He has given to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. So I want you to see this entire psalm. It's Psalm 112. So turn over to Psalm 112. Psalm 112. It's only 9 verses, so we'll look at the whole thing. Oh, look, I marked it, and then I'm flipping like I didn't. I outsmarted myself. Psalm 112, 10 verses. Here's what it says. Praise the Lord. Blessed is the man who fears the Lord, who greatly delights in his commandments. So, an obedient person. His offspring will be mighty in the land. The generation of the upright will be blessed. And then here's what God does. Wealth and riches are in his house, and his righteousness endures forever. Light dawns in the darkness for the upright. He is gracious, merciful, and righteous. So describing a godly person here. It is well with the man who deals generously. So there's the word, there's the idea. And lends, who actually helps folks out, who conducts his affairs with justice. For the righteous will never be moved. He will be remembered forever. And then here's a word for the day, by the way, and this is another sermon for another day. He is not afraid of bad news. His heart is firm, trusting in the Lord. That's a pretty good verse to hang your hat on nowadays. His heart is steady. He will not be afraid until he looks in triumph on his adversaries. And then here's what was quoted. He has distributed freely. He has given to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. His horn is exalted in honor. The wicked man sees it and is angry. He gnashes his teeth and melts away. The desire of the wicked will perish. So you have this description here of godliness, of godly generosity that is quoted by Paul. Whatever you have financially, whether it's a lot, whether it's a little, whether it's in the middle, we all have an obligation as believers to be generous towards one another, and when we can, to help one another out when it comes to this kind of thing. And that's what he's trying to get the church at Corinth to understand. And he's been talking to them about it for several chapters. And this is still a need. I mean, this is something that you and I have opportunities to, sometimes, like maybe in your Sunday school class, you've helped out Sunday school class members. Within the church's benevolence fund, we've helped out folks. You've probably done things behind the scenes that nobody knows about, over the years. I know Donna and I in the ministry, the Lord just has always provided. We've never gone hungry. There hadn't always been a lot in the bank, but we've always made it because the Lord will just take that money and stretch it, or just send you some from some anonymous person. You just it's a weird thing to see. And so that you and I get to bless other people with this. So he begins to talk about the Lord doing that. So go back to 2 Corinthians 9 and then verse 10. He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest, not of your money, but of your righteousness. So you grow in your faith, you mature in your faith, you become a person who walks closer to the Lord when you and I live with generosity towards others. Specifically here, other believers. It's a good thing to give to give to charity and to help other folks out. And, maybe occasionally you stop and give money to the guy on the side of the road. I don't know if you do that or not. But what he's talking about here specifically is churches helping other churches, believers helping other believers. And we are family, and we're to do that. So verse 11, he says, you will be enriched in every way, to be generous in every way, through us will produce thanksgiving to God. That's a pretty cool promise. Verse 11 again, you will be enriched in every way to be generous in every way, which through us will produce thanksgiving to God. So there is, when you give, when I give, we get the benefit of that too. When we help someone out financially, when we help someone out materially, when, you go and, maybe you go to, as a deacon, you go to a widow's house and fix something, or, that's just one example. Whatever those things are, you get as much benefit out of serving one of God's children as that child of God gets from you serving them. And that's what he's trying to get across here. This is one of the reasons that when you study spiritual gifts, the gift of service is one that so many people have. Because, it's Christ's likeness. He came to serve. That's who Christ is. And so when you and I serve others, we are being like Jesus. He washed the feet of the disciples. He literally died for us. He actually did that. So he served others. He put others first. He surrendered to the will of the Father. So it's Christ-like to do this for other people. Verse 12, for the ministry of this service is not only supplying the needs of the saints, but is also overflowing in many thanksgivings to God. So what happens when you and I are generous? Yes, it helps the person out that we're giving to. That's the, sort of the temporary thing. Because eventually, if you get somebody and they're hurting financially and maybe they're behind in their house note or their car note or whatever it might be, and you help them out and they get caught up, they still, that bill didn't go away. Hopefully the Lord provides for that and they'll, get back on their feet. But the eternal side of that is when you and I are generous to one another, there is praise and thanksgiving directed to God. And that's worship. And ultimately, that's the point, is him getting the glory for this, not you and I bragging about how generous we are or how, or bragging about how humble we are or, whatever it might be. It's about him getting the glory for, specifically here, an offering being taken up for a group of believers that is struggling. And this church at Corinth, which has its own set of problems. If I've told y'all before, it seems to be the worst church in the New Testament. It's awful. They had all kinds of issues at this church. They were as messed up could be, and yet they still have this opportunity to be generous to other believers. So, verse 13. By their approval of this service, they will glorify God because of your submission that comes from your confession of the gospel of Christ and the generosity of your contribution for them and for all others. Did you catch all that? They are going to be the people that you and I are generous towards. Their response is they're going to glorify God because of what you did, because of your submission. And then he explains why that submission was made, why you and I are generous. It comes from our confession, your confession of the gospel of Christ. The gospel is the good news. Paul defines it in 1 Corinthians as the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It is the ultimate gift. It is the ultimate act of grace, an act of mercy, an act of service, and all of those things. And when we believe the gospel, when we realize what Christ did for us, and Paul talks about it in Philippians, have this in you that was also in Christ Jesus, and talks about that idea of being a servant. When we are generous towards others, whether it's financially, materially, whether it's spiritually, listen, sometimes you get in a hurry, I get in a hurry, and sometimes you've just got to stop and get unhurried and just generously give of your time because people just need to talk. They just need an ear. That's huge. It's huge. You may not get to the restaurant first, but you spent that time with them, and they've been encouraged by that. And so those things are huge, and ultimately it comes because we know what Christ has done for us. We know who he is. We know his nature. Verse 14, while they long for you and pray for you, so the ones who are getting the offering are praying for those who are taking it up because of the surpassing grace of God upon you. It's an amazing thing to see when God provides when you're in need, and he does it through other believers. It's just different. It's interesting. You recognize that the Lord's in it. You hear countless stories of people getting, down to the penny what it was they needed. You hear that over and over again. You hear stories. I remember, especially early in ministry, you hear preachers tell stories about, guys just showing up to the bank and somebody paid their car off, or, that sort. You hear those kinds of things. The Lord just provides in that, and he gets the glory for it. So he kind of wraps this section up with some praise. He starts preaching. He says, "Thanks be to God for his inexpressible gift." So he just praises the Lord for what they're going to do and the fact that they are taking this up for them. And so I just, to write out what this whole paragraph is talking about, and really the whole last few chapters, the idea is a very simple one. Our generosity towards one another glorifies God. Our generosity towards one another glorifies God. We've been going through 1 John on Sunday mornings, and we're up to chapter 5 this week, so we're in the last chapter. It'll take a few weeks to do that, and then we'll do 2nd and 3rd John. But one of the things that John comes back to consistently, and we'll see it this Sunday, is that if you're actually saved, if you've genuinely been converted, you are going to love other believers. It's just that simple. And if you don't, then you weren't converted. You weren't actually saved. And so he makes that point in almost every chapter of 1 John. It's just woven throughout the whole thing. This offering that the church at Corinth is participating in is tangible proof of that kind of thing. When you and I give to North American missions, when you and I give to international missions, when we take up offerings, whatever it might be, a love offering for someone, or you just pick it. It is our way of showing that, yes, we do actually love one another. Because what's the best way to tell what's important to somebody? Look at their checkbook. If you really want to know what somebody prioritizes, take a look at their bank statement. And if you really want to see what somebody's character is, see how they react when money issues get a little weird. You start seeing people will act really funny when finances are involved. You can see faith or lack of faith. You can see maturity or lack of maturity, because everybody worries about money because that's the system we live in. I mean, we don't carry around cows and chickens anymore and trade them for anything. I mean, we'd be arrested walking down the street with that stuff. And you gotta have that piece of plastic. Sometimes they don't even take cash anymore. You got to have that thing, but it just represents what it's supposed to represent. But ultimately, those things, God uses them or allows us to use them to help one another, and he gets the glory for that. And so that's what he's trying to get across here. When you and I are generous to one another, it brings glory to him. So, that's that section in 2 Corinthians, and so that wraps that up. When we get to chapter 10, and really through the rest of the book, which goes through chapter 13, he's going to spend a lot of time talking about himself and his opponents and, his ministry and those sorts of things. So this really wraps up a particular section in 2 Corinthians. So for those of you who are watching tonight, or maybe you're watching on YouTube later, thank you all for being here. If you have any questions, you can just send them to me, John, John, at mycbcc.org, and I can answer those. But thank you all for being here, and we're going to log off now and go to our prayer time. But thank you all.